The message arrived at 0400 station time. Nobody sends a final warning at a reasonable hour. Final warnings are theater, and theater needs its audience half asleep, wrong-footed, already at a disadvantage before the curtain goes up. I knew that. I had known that for 19 years. So I read it once, set it down on my desk beside the cold mug from the night before, and I made fresh coffee. The document was 412 pages long. It was written in 17 alien languages and 2 human ones, none of which the council had asked us to use. The gold seal at the top was the kind of decoration that took someone a very long time to design, which told me the council had been planning this for a very long time, long enough to commission art for it, long enough to feel certain. I poured the coffee. I sat. I read it again. My name is Commander Yael Driss Okafor. I was born in the Lagos-Helsinki corridor 41 years ago, during a brownout, which my mother always said explained a great deal about me. I have been a soldier, a diplomat, and once, briefly and accidentally, a hostage negotiator for a situation involving 3 nervous Keth merchants and a very confused cargo drone. I have stood in more council chambers than I can count. I have heard the word no in 46 languages, and I have heard it in the particular silence that species use when they have already decided and are merely waiting for you to finish talking. I know what this document was. It was 43 violations of the Galactic Compact. It was formal language wrapped around a very old, very simple idea. The idea was this: sit down, be small, and be grateful we are not doing worse. I turned to page 7. Clause 7, subsection D. Non-compliance with the terms of this notice will result in authorized species-level quarantine, pending review by the Council's full membership. Not a war. A quarantine. Like we were a cold they had caught. I sat with that for a moment. The coffee was good. Outside the viewport, the station's dock lights ran amber gold across the hull of the Unconditional, which sat in berth 4 the way a very large, very patient dog sits when it has been told to stay. She was a destroyer, mid-class. We had brought a mid-class destroyer to this negotiation because anything larger would have been rude, and we had been raised to have manners. The violations themselves were almost creative, 43 of them. Humanity had apparently broken the Galactic Compact by developing what the Council termed recursively autonomous weapons architectures, what we called standard naval artificial intelligence, the kind of AI that runs targeting, threat assessment, resource allocation, and a dozen other processes simultaneously without needing a human to approve each individual calculation. The kind of AI we had been running for 40 years. The Council had noticed. Or rather, the Council had noticed 40 years ago and had spent the time since then deciding what to do about it. That was the part that interested me, not the anger, the waiting, patient, organized, thorough. 412 member species, signatures from all of them, an airtight legal case built on clauses most humans had never read. Someone had done their homework. I respected that. I respect preparation. I had been preparing too. I finished the coffee, rinsed the mug, and pulled up my own document on the console beside the viewport. 17 pages. No gold seal. No dead languages. No art. Just language. Simple and direct and specific. The way a well-placed tool is specific. The kind of thing that does exactly what it is meant to do and nothing extra. I read it one more time. I changed 3 words. I put it away. Then I opened a channel to the bridge and told Lieutenant Hannah Cole to wake Admiral Marin. Hannah's voice came back the way it always did, even, efficient, and with that particular quality of a person who has been awake for 2 hours already and is judging everyone who was not. She said the Admiral was already on the bridge. Of course she was. Admiral Cora Marin did not sleep before things like this. I had served under her for 9 years and I had never seen her do anything that resembled panic. But I had also never seen her fully rest before a decision point. She processed at night. She sat in the dark and ran numbers, and came out the other side of the dark, already 3 moves ahead. She was 53 years old, and she had the kind of face that made young officers instinctively straighten their posture, not because she demanded it, but because standing crooked in front of her felt like a personal failure. I went to the bridge. She was standing at the forward viewport, hands behind her back, looking at the Unconditional. The dock lights moved across her face. She did not look at me when I walked in. "They sent it," she said. "They sent it. 43. 43. She finally turned. Her eyes moved to my face, the way a sensor array moves across a target zone. Methodical, taking readings. How's the counter document? Ready. She looked back at the ship. The unconditional sat there in the amber light, patient, and enormous, and entirely unconcerned with the feelings of anyone in this system. She was 340 meters of things humanity had learned to build after several centuries of learning, the hard way, that the universe did not care whether you lived or died, and that the only answer to that indifference was to care very much for yourself. They'll expect us to request more time, Marin said. I know. What are we going to do? I picked up the cold coffee mug on the console beside her. It was empty. I set it back down. We're going to show up early, I said. She almost smiled. Almost. Cora Marin's smile was the kind of thing you filed away for later and took out, when you needed to remember that this was all going to be fine. The chamber convenes in 6 hours, she said. We'll be there in 4. She nodded once. That was all. That was Cora Marin, agreeing that what I was about to do in that chamber was the right thing, and that she would have the unconditional ready for whatever came after, and that humanity had not spent 200 years of breaking and rebuilding itself to sit still, while someone else put words like quarantine in a gold-sealed document at 0400 in the morning. I went back to my quarters. I changed into my dress uniform. I left my rank insignia off the collar. They would find out what that meant later. I put the 17-page document in my coat pocket, picked up my coffee mug, because I always think better when I have something to hold, and I went to go introduce the Galactic Council to the concept of a counteroffer. They had been in session for 8,000 years. Nobody had ever given them one before. I thought about that in the corridor. The Council had existed longer than most human civilizations had names. They had absorbed species, lost species, written laws that governed the behavior of beings across 400 light-years of contested space. They had sent 17 previous civilizations a document very much like the one sitting in my console. All 17 of those civilizations had responded the same way. They had complied. Some of them had done it gracefully. Some had done it in pieces, resisting at each stage, until the weight of the Council's combined pressure made resistance feel more expensive than surrender. But they had all, in the end, sat down. I walked through the dock corridor, and the dock lights ran amber across the viewport panels, and the unconditional sat in berth 4, and did not move, and did not need to. 43 violations. Bless their hearts. They had stopped counting long before they got to 43. The transport to the station hub left in 20 minutes. I was going to be on it. I was going to walk into that chamber 4 hours before the appointed time, set 17 pages on the table in front of 412 species representatives, and I was going to wait while they figured out what they were looking at. I was not nervous. Nervous was for people who were not sure. I was very, very sure. The council chamber smelled like 9 different atmospheres running through a shared ventilation system that had clearly been designed by committee. Something like sulfur from the Veth delegation's environmental pod. Something like rain and copper from the Surai section. Something that reminded me of a library I had visited once on Earth, in the old city, which had burned down 2 years after I saw it, and which I had never entirely stopped thinking about. I walked in 4 hours early, and sat down at the human delegation table. It was a good table. Heavy pale stone, carved with nothing because humanity had been told the carvings on the other tables were hereditary honors, and we hadn't been around long enough to earn any. I had always thought that was a useful thing to know about an organization, what it put on its tables. I put my 17 pages on ours. The hall was empty, except for 2 Veth archivists running calibrations on the translation arrays, and a young Surai page who looked at me, and then looked at my empty collar, where the rank insignia should have been, and then looked at me again, with the particular expression of someone doing arithmetic that keeps coming out wrong. I gave her a pleasant nod. She went back to her work. The chamber filled over the next 4 hours. They came in species, by seniority, which meant the Veth representatives arrived last. The Veth were always last. 8,000 years of unbroken civilization will do that to a species. It makes you certain enough of your own importance that you do not consider the social message of being last, because being last has always, for you, simply meant being most significant. Arbitrator Silvo was the Veth's chief representative. She was, by any measure, extraordinary. Tall, silver gray, with 4 sets of eyes arranged in a horizontal line that gave her a field of vision that covered almost the entire room at once. Her voice was the kind of voice that had never once said something it did not mean to say. Clear, warm, unhurried, the voice of a civilization that had been right for so long it had stopped checking. She came in and she saw me. She did not stop walking. She did not change her pace or her expression, but her upper two eyes moved to my empty collar and stayed there for 1 second longer than was necessary, and I filed that away. She took her place at the head of the chamber, and the session opened. The charges were read, all 43 of them. Silvo's voice gave each one the same weight, the same careful enunciation, the way a person reads a legal document who believes the document will do the work for them. Recursively autonomous weapons architectures, Clause 14.7 of the Galactic Compact. Fleet expansion exceeding the permitted tonnage threshold for non-member species, Clause 29.2. Unauthorized xenobiological research in a restricted zone, Clause 31.8. I listened and I took notes on a small pad I carried, because the habit was old and I had never broken it. Then Silvo set the document down, folded her hands, and looked at me with all 4 sets of eyes at once. Does the human delegation acknowledge receipt of the council's notice? The room was very quiet. I looked up from my notes. We acknowledge receiving the document, I said. The quiet got a different texture. I had been in enough rooms to know the difference between quiet, that means people are waiting, and quiet that means people are not sure what they just heard. This was the second kind. Somewhere to my left, one of the Keth representatives made a small sound with its upper breathing apparatus that, in Keth social grammar, was the equivalent of what? Silvo's expression did not change. To her credit, she was very good at this. The council requests a formal response to the 43 violations cited, she said. Specifically, acknowledgement of each violation and a compliance timeline. I have a response, I said. I picked up my 17 pages, and I slid them across the table toward the nearest council aide. Nobody moved to take it immediately. The aide, a young Dranathi whose species had been in the council for 600 years, and who had therefore never seen anything like this happen in that chamber, looked at the document, looked at me, looked at the document again, and then picked it up and walked it to Silvo's desk, with the careful steps of someone carrying something whose nature they have not yet determined. Silvo looked at it. She did not touch it. She looked at it the way you look at something that arrived in a package that was addressed to someone else. What is this? She said. A counteroffer, I said. The chamber did not go quiet. Something more specific happened. A certain kind of ripple moved through it, starting from the Veth section and moving outward through the senior delegations, and finally reaching the younger species at the outer rings. And what the ripple carried was the information that something that did not happen had just happened, and the processing of that information sounded, collectively, like 400 species of beings, all arriving at the same word at the same time. Counteroffer. Silvo sat for a moment. Then she looked up. The council does not receive counteroffers in response to formal enforcement notices, she said. Her voice was still even, still warm. But there was something underneath it now, something like a very stable structure discovering that the ground had shifted slightly. The purpose of this session is compliance review, not negotiation. I nodded. I understand that's how it has historically worked. It is not historical. It is procedural. Yes, I said. I read your procedure. All 412 pages of it. Clause 7, subsection D, was particularly interesting. I paused. You should read ours. She looked at the document on her desk. Then she looked at me. All 4 sets of eyes. The full measure of 8,000 years of civilization, pointed in my direction like a very polite instrument of enormous pressure. I had spent 19 years becoming the kind of person that did not bend under instruments of enormous pressure. I looked back. We will require time to review this, Silvo said. Of course, I said. Take 6 hours. Something happened in the room then that I had never produced in a council chamber before. Laughter. Not from the Veth. Never from the Veth. But from the younger delegations, the species who had been in the council for 2 centuries or less, who had their own histories with final warnings and compliance timelines, a sound moved through them that was surprised and complicated and not entirely comfortable, because it recognized something. Silvo heard it. Her third set of eyes moved toward the outer rings and then back to me, and now I could see, beneath the 8,000 years of certainty, the first very small edge of something else. She requested a recess. I told her that was fine. I went to the side corridor and called Hannah Cole and told her to have the unconditional run a standard combat drill at 1400 hours. Standard drill, Routine. Log it as scheduled maintenance. Hannah said. Understood, Commander. And then after a pause, their sensor arrays are going to pick that up. That's fine, I said. It's a standard drill. Another pause. The kind of pause that means a very professional person is smiling in a way that is technically off-duty. Yes, Commander, she said. I went back inside. One of the younger Dranathi representatives, a female whose name translated approximately to Liaison Voss, was standing near the human delegation's table when I came back in. She was looking at the empty chair beside mine, and then she looked at me, and she said, in passable human standard, "Your collar." I sat down. Yes? You are not wearing your rank insignia. No. She was quiet for a moment. Her species processed information in visible stages, the way you can sometimes watch a calculation happen in someone's face. That is deliberate. Most things I do are deliberate. She looked at my collar again, then at the 17 pages, which a council aide had now placed in front of Silvo's empty seat, then back at me. What does it mean? She said. The absence. I picked up my pen. I turned it in my hand the way I always do when I am deciding something. I had been turning this same pen in my hand since I was 22 years old, and did not know yet that the habit would outlast most of the other things I had been doing at 22. It means, I said, that I am not here in the capacity in which they expect me. Voss stood there another moment, then she went back to her seat. The recess ended. Silvo came back, and with her came the full Veth delegation, and an energy in the chamber that had not been there before. It was the energy of a room that had received information, and not yet decided what to do with it. It was the energy of a machine that had been running the same program for 8,000 years, and had just been handed a file format it did not recognize. Silvo sat. She set the 17 pages in front of her. She did not open them. Before the council reviews this document, she said, the delegation will be asked to address the original 43 violations. These violations are not in dispute, and the council requests a response. I set my pen down. I looked at Silvo. I said, no. The chamber was absolutely still. No? She said. Not in the manner you're requesting, I said. The violations listed are, by the council's own compact definitions, matters of interpretation. The council interprets our naval AI as a weapons architecture under Clause 14.7. We interpret it as standard operational infrastructure under the exemptions outlined in Clause 14.7, Paragraph 3. I paused. Paragraph 3, which your enforcement notice did not cite. The second kind of quiet. Silvo had Paragraph 3 memorized. I knew she did. And she knew, now, that I did too. The council's position, she said carefully, is that Paragraph 3 does not apply to recursively autonomous systems of this scale. That is a position, I agreed. It is also something we can discuss. That's what the 17 pages are for. She looked at me. 8,000 years. Full measure. Commander Driss-Okafor, she said, and my rank, without my insignia, landed in the room like a small, precise challenge. You understand that the Council has authorized enforcement action if this session does not produce compliance. I do. You understand what enforcement action means for a non-member species. I thought about my first crew. I thought about the apology that had arrived 3 years after the containment action, gold-sealed, beautifully worded, meaning nothing. I have a personal understanding of what it means, I said. Yes. The room heard something in that sentence. I had not raised my voice. I had not changed my expression, but something in those 7 words carried enough weight that even the Veth delegation's upper eyes moved, and the Keth representative made no sound at all, and Silvo, who had never in 8,000 years of civilization been answered this way, sat back 1 fraction of an inch. Then you understand the gravity of this session, she said. I understand it completely, I said. That's why I brought a counteroffer, instead of a compliance timeline. I reached into my coat pocket and put a second copy of the 17 pages on the human delegation's table. I did not open it. Take your 6 hours, I said. We'll be here. Outside, at 1400 hours, the unconditional ran its standard combat drill. The sensor arrays throughout the station lit up like 17 arguments happening in the same room. I kept my eyes on Silvo. She was very good. She was 8,000 years of good. But she heard the sensor readings begin to come in from her aides, one by one, and each reading was a word in a sentence that the Galactic Council had not expected to read today, and her upper eyes moved, just once, to the viewport that faced the dock. I watched her read the sentence. I waited. She looked back at me. And for the first time in the session, Seal Vo of the Veth, arbitrator of the Galactic Council, representative of 8,000 years of unbroken and unquestioned civilization, spoke to me without the warmth. "What?" she said. "Is that ship?" I looked at her pleasantly. "That's a destroyer," I said. "Midweight. We brought a midweight." The sensor data arrived in the Council's systems in real time. I knew what it looked like from their side. I had read the technical projections 3 months ago when Admiral Marin's team had run this exact scenario, sitting around a table in the Unconditionals Operations Center with cups of coffee going cold and a whiteboard covered in numbers. I had read what our standard combat drill looked like on alien sensor arrays, and I had sat back and I had said, "Well, all right then," and then I had started writing 17 pages. What it looked like from their side was wrong. Not wrong in a threatening way. Not wrong in the way that things look wrong when someone is trying to intimidate you. Wrong in the way that things look wrong when the instrument is broken, when the reading cannot be right because the reading would require something to be true that cannot be true. The unconditional was moving at a speed the Council's database classified as physically non-achievable for a vessel of her mass. Her targeting resolution was returning data that the system flagged, automatically, as sensor corruption, because no targeting system produced resolution at that precision, without errors, and the unconditional was producing none. Her energy signature was doing something that the Veth's most senior technical aide, a being named Coordinator Aaron who had been calibrating military sensor arrays for 300 years, would later describe in his report to the Council as resembling a star that had decided to leave. It was a standard drill. I cannot say this enough. It was the drill Ensign Cole ran on Tuesday mornings. It was the drill Lieutenant Commander Felix Grant had run so many times that he did it in his sleep, which I know because I had walked past his quarters once at 0200 and heard him calling targets. It was nothing new. It was nothing special. It was Tuesday. Seal Vo had my 17 pages open in front of her now. She had been reading them in the recess, and her technical aide Arn had been reading a copy, and 3 of the senior Dranathi analysts had been reading a copy, and several of the younger species representatives had been passed copies in the corridor by the Sarai Page, who had decided, on her own initiative, that this was the kind of document that needed to move quickly. I had heard about the page later. I thought she showed very good judgment. Seal Vo looked at the pages and looked at her sensor data and looked at me, and I could see her doing what very intelligent people do when they receive 2 pieces of information that each change the value of the other. She was recalculating. She was fast. 8,000 years of civilization had produced, in her, a mind that could process recalculation without showing it on the outside. But I had been in rooms with minds like hers before. I saw the moment the recalculation finished. It was in her 3rd set of eyes, the ones that dealt with close-range observation. They stopped moving. Everything else in her face stayed composed and professional, and entirely correct. Her 3rd set of eyes went absolutely still, the way things go still when they have found the number they were looking for, and the number is not what they expected. She set the 17 pages down. "Commander," she said, "the Council requires clarification on several points in your document." "Of course," I said. "Point 1, she said, "you propose that humanity will not decommission its fleet or submit to Council inspection, citing exemptions under clauses 14.7, paragraph 3, and 29.2, paragraph 7. Correct. The Council's position is that those exemptions were not written with a species of humanity's current development in mind." "The Council's position is interesting," I said. "Our position is that the exemptions do not specify a development ceiling. If the Council intended a ceiling, it should have written one." I paused. "We would be happy to help draft clearer language for future compacts." The sound from the outer delegations this time was not quite laughter. It was the cousin of laughter. The kind of sound that happens when something is surprising, and the surprise lands before the appropriate response does. Seal Vo did not make a sound. She moved to point 2. Point 2. You propose to share your autonomous weapons architecture. Your words, not ours. Freely. With all species, including non-council members. Yes. The Council's interpretation of this proposal is that you intend to destabilize the existing technological balance. I picked up my pen. I turned it once. I set it down. The Council's interpretation, I said, is one way to read it. Another way to read it is that we intend to ensure that no single party, including ourselves, holds exclusive advantage. Open access is not destabilization. Exclusive access is destabilization. You have had exclusive access to several technologies for a very long time, arbitrator. The third set of eyes. Still again. Point 3, she said. Her voice had changed. Not dramatically. Not in a way that anyone who had not been listening very carefully for a very long time would notice. But the warmth was not entirely gone. What had replaced it was something more like attention. The specific, directed attention of a person who has revised their estimate of who they are talking to. You mention non-council species. You list 16 of them as signatories to a parallel document. 17, I said. She paused one beat. 17. The 17th confirmed this morning, I said. The Renali. Something moved through the chamber. Not a sound. A pressure shift. The Renali were not a small species. The Renali were not a species the council could dismiss. The Renali had been declining council membership for 400 years, for reasons they had never fully explained. And everyone in the chamber knew it, and now they had signed their name to a document sitting on my table. I watched Silvo decide whether to respond to that. She decided not to. The council will require additional time to deliberate, she said. Of course, I said. We have given you 6 hours. Is that sufficient? The way she looked at me then, I will carry it. It was not hostility. It was not the cold, bureaucratic distance of a species processing a lesser civilization. It was something that required more words than that, something that I do not have a clean name for in any of the languages I speak, which is 12. The closest I can come is this. It was the look of someone who has been playing a game they have played 10,000 times, and has just been shown a move they have never seen before, and the move is completely legal, and the game has changed. 6 hours, she said, will be sufficient for a preliminary response. I nodded. She stood, and the chamber stood with her, and the recess was called, and as the delegations filed out, I sat at the human table with my pen and my 17 pages, and I did not move. The Sarai page was the last one to leave. She stopped at the doorway and looked back at me. She was very young. Her species matured slowly, and she was probably, in equivalent human terms, around 20. She had the look that 20 has when it has just seen something it will not stop thinking about for the rest of its life. I nodded at her. She nodded back and left. And I sat in the empty chamber, and I thought about the drill still running outside, the unconditional moving through her Tuesday patterns in the dock space, elegant and patient and entirely unconcerned. And I thought about something I had not let myself think about since I sat down at this table 4 hours ago. I thought about what it had cost. Not the ships, not the AI systems, not the years of engineering and mathematics, and the 1,000 small decisions made by people who were tired and under-resourced, and still showed up. Not even the wars, the ones we had fought among ourselves before we ever knew the council existed, the long centuries of breaking things and fixing them and breaking them differently the second time. I thought about what Silvo had said, in the first hour of this session, before she knew yet that I had teeth. She had said, "You are young. You are dangerous. You do not yet understand what you are." I had not answered that directly. I had answered it with 17 pages and a midweight destroyer running Tuesday drills. But here, in the empty chamber, I let myself answer it the other way. She was right that we were young. Every other species in this council had been a civilization longer than humanity had been a species. The Veth had written laws when our ancestors were still working out agriculture. We were, by every calendar in this chamber, embarrassingly new. But she was wrong about the rest. We knew exactly what we were. We were the species that had broken itself 11 times and rebuilt 11 times, and each time rebuilt something that the previous version could not have imagined. We were the species that had caused 3 of its own near extinctions, and had looked at each one, afterward, and said, "All right, what did we learn?" We were the species that had been told, by reality itself, in the clearest possible terms, that the universe did not care if we lived, and had taken that information and done something that no other species in this chamber had ever needed to do with it. We had gotten back up. Not once. Not twice. Every single time. And you do not do that without becoming something. You do not break, and rebuild, and break, and rebuild, and come out the other side, the same as when you started. You come out different. You come out knowing something about walls that species who have never hit a wall do not know. You know that walls end. You know that doors exist. You know that if the door is locked, there is a key somewhere, and if there is no key, there is a window, and if there is no window, you learn enough about the wall to make one. The Veth had 8,000 years of unbroken civilization. I sat in their chamber with my 17 pages, and my empty collar, and my mid-weight destroyer running a Tuesday drill, and I thought, they have never had to find the door. They do not know what it costs to find the door. They do not know what you become in the finding. The lights in the chamber cycled to low. The session was in recess. Outside, the unconditional finished its drill and came to rest in berth 4, and the sensor alerts in the council's system went quiet. And all of it, the speed, the targeting resolution, the energy signature that looked like a star trying to leave, all of it was gone, and everything was normal again. Standard. Routine. Nothing to see here. I picked up my pen. I wrote one word on my notepad, which I had been doing since I was 22, and which was entirely unnecessary given that I had the information memorized, but which felt important, because the habit was mine, and I kept the things that were mine. The word was, start. The council's preliminary response arrived after 9 hours, not 6. I had slept for 6 of them. I always slept before the answer. The question was the thing that kept me awake. Once the variables were set, once everything that could be done had been done, I closed my eyes, and I slept the way a soldier sleeps, completely, without ceremony, in whatever position the available space allowed. Hannah Cole woke me at hour 7, with coffee, and the information that Silvo had requested an extension. I drank the coffee and told her that was fine. At hour 9, the session reconvened. Silvo's face was the same as it had always been, composed, certain, 8,000 years of good posture. But the chamber around her was different. Several of the outer ring delegations had shifted positions, physically, in a way that was technically a protocol violation, and which nobody was going to cite, because the protocol assumed they would be sitting where they had always sat, and they were not. Liaison Voss of the Dranathi was now sitting 2 seats closer to the center. The Renali observer, who had been permitted entry as a courtesy during the recess, was sitting in the gallery with his hands in his lap, and his eyes on everything. Silvo opened the session, and did not reach for her enforcement notice. She reached for my 17 pages. The Council has reviewed the human delegation's counter-proposal, she said. The Council finds several points of interest and several points of concern, and wishes to address them in turn. Of course, I said. Your proposal that the autonomous systems architecture be made available freely to all species, she said. The Council's concern is the speed of such a release. Technological transfer at this scale, without structured oversight, creates instability. We agree, I said. She paused. You agree, she said. We propose a phased release, 12-month intervals, beginning with member and non-council species simultaneously, with a joint monitoring body that includes both council members and non-council representatives. I paused. Paragraph 4, page 9. She turned to page 9. The chamber watched her read it. This was, I had found, the most interesting part of any negotiation, watching very intelligent people discover that you had already thought of the objection they were about to raise. It produces a very specific quality of silence, not the silence of defeat, the silence of recalibration. She moved to the next point. Your proposal regarding independent observers for fleet inspection, she said. The Council questions the legitimacy of non-council observers. The Council questions their legitimacy, I said. The question is whether the Council's assessment of legitimacy is binding on non-council species. I picked up my pen. We don't believe it is. The 17 species who have signed the parallel document don't believe it is. If the Council would like to make that argument formally, we are prepared to discuss the relevant sections of the original compact, which does not define non-council species as illegitimate. It defines them as non-member. Coordinator Aaron, the technical aide, turned in his chair and said something quietly to Silvo and Veth. She did not respond to him. She turned another page. I had been in enough rooms to know when the other party was reading something they had not expected to find. There is a rhythm to it. The eyes move differently. The hands go still. A person reading to confirm what they already know moves quickly, with confidence. A person reading something that changes their understanding slows down, goes back, slows down again. Silvo slowed down. Page 12. Page 12 was the one I had written last. I had written 11 pages in 3 weeks, and then I had sat with page 12 for 4 days, writing it and erasing it, and writing it differently, because page 12 was the one that said the thing that was actually true. Page 12 said, humanity is not asking to leave the compact. Humanity is asking to help write the next one. It said that the current compact, 412 pages, was built on an assumption that the Council did not need to state, because it had never been tested. The assumption that the Council was the center around which all other civilizations would eventually orbit. That membership meant gravity, and non-membership meant drift, and species in drift would eventually fall into compliance because the only alternative was the cold. Page 12 said, we are proposing a different geometry, not a council surrounded by non-members, a network, multiple centers of gravity, multiple bodies with legitimate standing, the council as one node in a larger structure, still the oldest, still the most established, still the holder of 8,000 years of institutional memory that no other body could match, but no longer the only weight in the room. Page 12 said, this is not a threat. This is mathematics. If you remain the only weight in the room, you will eventually have to enforce your position against a species you cannot enforce it against. We are that species. Not because we chose to be, because of what we had to become to get here. We are giving you the option of making that fact useful, instead of dangerous. Silvo read page 12. She read it for a long time. Then she set the 17 pages down, and she looked at me and she said, very quietly, so that the chamber had to go still to hear her, are you threatening us, Commander? The question underneath every other question. I had been waiting for it since hour 1. I thought about it. A real pause. Not a diplomatic pause, not the kind you use to control the pace of a room. A genuine pause. The kind where you are actually considering the answer, because the answer matters. No, I said. We are the only party in this room that isn't. She sat with that. The chamber sat with that. We are not threatening you because we do not need to, I said. We are not threatening you because what we are proposing does not require it. A threat implies we need something from you. We need the Council to be a functional institution. We need stable galactic governance. We need oversight structures that work. Those things are in our interest, as much as they are in yours. I paused one more time. The question you should be asking is not whether we are threatening you. The question is why we are the first species in 400 years to sit down at this table and offer to help build something instead of just fighting the position you already hold. Silvo's third set of eyes. Still. Then, for the first time, she spoke to me without any of the layers. Without the 8,000 years of institutional authority. Without the warmth, that was also a kind of pressure. Without the specific tone she used for species that the Council had already decided about. She said, what do you want from this? And I said, a seat at the table we are helping to build. The chamber was still for a long time. Then Coordinator Arn said something in Veth that the translation array rendered as, there is precedent for this, and the Dranathi senior representative said something to his neighbor that did not need translation, because it was one word in their language, and that word was yes. And Liaison Voss stopped moving entirely the way she did when she was absorbing information she was going to think about for the rest of her career. Silvo looked at the 17 pages. She looked at me. She looked at the empty collar. I would like to know, she said, what rank you hold. I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled in the chamber. The rank doesn't matter, I said. I am here, in the capacity of humanity. She studied me for a moment longer. Then she did something I had not expected, and that I will not forget. She inclined her head. Not a bow. Not submission. Something more specific. The Veth gesture of recognition between parties of equal weight. I inclined mine back. The Council, she said, requests a formal recess to deliberate. We will return with a preliminary structural response to your counter-proposal. Take all the time you need, I said. She stood. The chamber stood. And as they filed out, I sat at the human delegation table with my pen and my 17 pages and the particular quiet of a room that had held something enormous and was now breathing out, and I thought about nothing in particular for a long moment, the way you think about nothing when everything has been spent. Then Hannah Cole's voice came over the comm in my ear. She said, Commander, you've got incoming. I said. From the council? No, she said, and her voice had the tone it had when something was happening that she had not seen before. From outside, 17 non-council species, co-signed. They want a meeting. I set my pen down. What do they want to discuss? I said. There was a pause, the kind of pause that means the other person is rereading the message to make sure they have it right. They want to know how you did it, Hannah said. Not the ships, not the systems. They want to know how you walked into that room. I picked up my cold coffee mug, empty. I turned it in my hand. Outside, the unconditional sat in berth 4, patient and still, in the amber dock light. I thought about a girl who was 22 and standing in a council chamber for the first time and understanding in her body, not her head, in her actual body, that the decision had already been made, that the word they had for her species, in 17 languages, was manageable. I thought about the crew she lost. I thought about the apology that arrived 3 years later, gold-sealed, beautifully worded. I thought about 19 years spent making that word obsolete. Tell them we'll be in touch, I said. I went to make fresh coffee. The council had 412 member species. 17 was not a coalition. 17 was a start.